Today's story is about India's biggest sex scandal, a case that the government didn't take seriously, the media didn't have the courage to report, and no one dared to speak up about. Over 250 young girls aged 11 to 20 who were studying in schools or colleges became victims of sexual assault, blackmail, and sexual exploitation orchestrated by powerful individuals. Their cries for help went unanswered. Today we will uncover the details of this scandal, exploring the reasons behind the silence and the impact it had on those involved. Let's dive further into the chilling details of the Ajmer 1992 sex scandal. In Ajmer, a city in Rajasthan, India, most of the Hindu girls attended Ajmer's Sophia Senior Secondary School and Savitri School. These all-girls schools are still open today and are the largest in the city. Girls from wealthy families, including daughters of high-ranking officers and rich locals, used to study there. The tragedy began when a girl in 9th grade fell in love with a boy named Farooq Chishti, who was from a local affluent family. Since it was an all-girls school at the time, these girls mostly met boys outside of school. Their friendship turned into love, and one day, Farooq invited her to his farmhouse. They went to a poultry farm in Faisagar together. But unfortunately, the boy had sinister intentions. There, he sexually assaulted her and took explicit photos of her being violated. Later, he used those pictures to threaten and blackmail the girl. He even forced her to introduce him to her classmates or friends. Desperate, the girl complied with Farooq's demand to bring another friend to the farmhouse, and this set off a chain of blackmail and exploitation. Farooq was not alone. This whole scheme involved a group of repeat offenders. His accomplice, Nafis Chishti, and other boys also joined in. These Muslim boys targeted young victims from the all-girls schools. They would group assault the girls, take photos, and use these to blackmail and silence their victims, preventing them from reporting the crimes. Despite some girls informing their families, societal pressure silenced them. Their farmhouse became the hub of these heinous acts, and between 1990 and 1992, the number of victims exceeded 250, aged between 11 and 20. These girls were forced to call their sister-in-law, sisters, friends, and the same terrible acts were done to them as well. Shockingly, many of their families remained unaware of these activities because the girls didn't dare to tell anyone, fearing their photos would be leaked. Remember, this was the 1990s in India, where having sexual contact with men was highly taboo. Also, the main perpetrators were very powerful men. The perpetrators were a group of Muslim men led by Farooq Chishti, the mastermind, his brother Nafis Chishti, and Anwar Chishti. They were leaders of the local youth congress and relatives of the powerful Kadim family, responsible for the caretaking of Ajmer Sharif Dargah, a sacred place for Muslims. It is believed that the culprits might have had links to agencies like Pakistan's ISI. These white-collared men were powerful, influential, and servants of Ajmer, making it difficult for anyone to oppose them. Since the perpetrators were mostly Muslim and the victims were Hindu girls, the case even escalated into a Muslim-Hindu dispute. Hindu-Muslim relations in India are often strained, marked by mistrust and occasional violence. Political leaders sometimes exploit these divisions, fueling resentment and clashes. It sure was a grim time in Ajmer during that period. Increasing numbers of girls were exploited by the gang, and explicit photos of their abuse were created and eventually circulated. Nafis and Farouk used to get these pictures printed, and that's where the leak started. An employee of the lab was also involved in the scandal. Prints of the victims being assaulted were distributed around the city. Whoever got the pictures started blackmailing the victims, calling them to different places, and again, assaulting them. The victims continued to face harassment and threats following these traumatic incidents. Sadly, society and their families offered little support. The pictures even reached the authorities, but instead of taking action, everyone stayed silent. The police panicked and tried to cover up the case. To make matters worse, local tabloids got hold of these compromising images. These tabloids and newspapers then used the explicit content to blackmail the girls' families, demanding money to keep the images hidden. Hundreds of girls and their families were caught in a cycle of victimization and fear. Then the news spread that several victims whose pictures were leaked started taking their own lives, one after another. Around 6 girls are known to have ended their lives. But the police didn't investigate these deaths. The case was so suppressed that many witnesses and victims turned hostile due to social stigma, and many details were buried. Some women reached the police station, but they were told to keep things quiet. The victims were hoping for justice from the police, but the police were shattering their hopes. And finally, in 1992, this large-scale sex scandal was exposed by a local newspaper called Dainik Navjyoti. The article explained what happened during the crime and featured some images taken by the perpetrators. Young journalist Santosh Gupta wrote and published this report on April 21, 1992, clearly stating that about 250 women were being sexually exploited. When this news was published, the entire city was in shock and fear. But those who attempted to uncover the case also faced huge threats. Madan Singh, the chief editor of a local paper called Leron Ki Barka, who had been writing extensively on the Ajmer case, was attacked and killed in a government hospital. On September 4th, 2 people in a van stopped his car and shot at him, injuring his hip. Madan escaped by jumping into a drain. In the hospital, he identified Dr. Rajkumar Jaipal, a former Congress MLA, and Sawai Singh, a local mafia leader, as his attackers. But the police didn't take his statements seriously. Eventually, he was attacked again inside the hospital by 5 to 6 people. The police registered a case of murder against Sawai Singh, Rajkumar Jaipal, Narendra Singh, and others, and prosecuted them. But all the accused were acquitted in court. Years later, Sawai was killed by Madan Singh's 2 sons, who vowed to take revenge for their father's death. Some people are trying to protect Madan as a martyr. They suggest he was probably killed because he tried to expose Jaipal in the sex scandal through his newspaper column. However, there is information that sheds a negative light on Madan Singh. Police records showed Madan had over 20 criminal cases against him and had been convicted in at least 4. He started Leron Ki Barka as a weekly in 1983 and was known for using it to blackmail for advertising money. When the sex scandal gained attention, he turned it into a daily newspaper and allegedly used his column to demand money from the victims' parents. Nonetheless, the scandal was indeed a huge shock to the entire nation, sparking protests and increasing communal tensions. People believe it was an act of religious hatred. As things heated up, Rajasthan Chief Minister Bairon Singh Shekhawat ordered strict action against those involved. But building a case was tough because many victims were scared to come forward. Instead, the blackmail photos and videos helped identify the perpetrators. Initially, 17 victims gave statements, but most later withdrew them. Over 250 women were victims of the scandal, yet only 12 filed complaints. The case weakened due to a lack of evidence. In the end, only 2 victims appeared in court. Pushpa Danwani, one of them, bravely shared her story. She went to the well-known Sophia Secondary School in Ajmer. She was lively and ambitious, dreaming of a career in politics. She also wanted a gas cylinder connection, which was a big deal in the 90s and required recommendations from ministers and MPs. So through a friend, she met Farouk and the other perpetrators. Later, Anwar Chishti had her fill out a form and promised her a place in Congress. But things took a dark turn. One day, Nafis and Farouk offered her a ride in their van while she was heading home from school. Instead of taking her home, they drove her to a farmhouse, assaulted her, took obscene photos, and blackmailed her. The police ignored the complaints of the victim girl. The reporter who broke the story believes the police were more concerned with preventing unrest than ensuring justice for the girls. Following the slow investigation, Santosh Gupta released additional reports that included blurred-out photographs of the blackmailed victims. The entire city of Ajmer felt the pain of the victims, shown sitting next to 2 cruel individuals smiling. The newspaper also revealed that the local police knew about the scandal a year before it became public. They struggled with the decision to publish the photos, but eventually did to force the authorities to take action. These reports led to massive protests and put pressure on the state government, causing an uproar across the city. People became even angrier when the then Inspector General of Police, Omendra Bhardwaj, stated in a press conference that the case was not as serious as reported and that the women had not been sexually exploited, casting doubt on the characters and morals of the 4 women whose photos were found. This statement sparked more protest across Rajasthan, with demands for the immediate arrest of the culprits. In September 1992, 18 offenders were charged in court with abduction and sexual assault. Some of them were released on bail, reducing the named offenders to 12 in the first charge sheet, filed in September 1992. And surprisingly, the main perpetrator, Farouk, was not among the prosecuted individuals because his lawyer successfully argued in court that his mental condition was unstable. In 1998, an Ajmer Sessions Court sentenced 8 of the 12 convicts to life imprisonment. In 2001, the High Court acquitted 4 of these convicts, but upheld the convictions of the others, though some charges were partially cleared. However, a year later, the Rajasthan High Court reduced the life sentences to the time already served, meaning they were freed. In 2007, a fast-track court in Ajmer convicted Farouk Chishti, but again, in 2013, the High Court released him on time served. The man who led the exploitation of 250 girls was released after just 6 years in prison. To sum up, most of the accused have completed their sentences or are either out on bail. Over 100 girls who survived the scandal still haven't received justice because the case is still dragging on in court. Even 30 years later, every new surrender, sentence, or development forces the survivors to return to court and relive the trauma. In December 2023, during a court hearing, one victim expressed her deep pain by screaming in the courtroom. She angrily asked the lawyers and the accused why she was still being called to court after 30 years, saying she is now a grandmother and wants to be left alone. It's sad that the Indian authorities could do absolutely nothing for the victims, instead making them relive their pain through meaningless summons. Most recently, on July 16, 2023, a documentary called The Black Chapter of Ajmer was aired. It was briefly available on YouTube before being removed the next day. The movie Ajmer 92 was released on July 21st, 2023, despite protests and controversies. The Ajmer sexual grooming and abuse case was one of the earliest examples of such organized gangs in the country and the world. If photos and videos were used to trap and blackmail girls in 1992, we can imagine how severe such crimes would be today with smartphones and the digital age. It's sad to learn that some people at that time, instead of sympathizing with the victims and launching a national movement to ensure harsh punishment for the perpetrators, were more concerned about making sure that none of the victim girls married into their families. It is an example of how repressive Indian society was back then to sexual assault victims. No one in Ajmer wants to talk about this case because of its nature. It's a dark stain on the city's history. Imagine being a girl or the parent of a girl in a society that is afraid to speak the truth and support the victims, fearing it might offend a certain community or cause riots. The silence and fear surrounding this case show the deep-rooted issues in the Indian society and the urgent need for justice and accountability. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.